Prominent couple, respected in the community, are stabbed to death in their own home. Nothing about the case makes sense. Not the crime scene, the motive, or even the forensic evidence. Stabbing is a personal crime. There's often a relationship between the victim and the killer. A task force of agents and police quickly learn nothing about this case is usual.
Etna, New Hampshire is a small town. It's the kind of place where people trust their neighbors and leave their doors unlocked. A double murder shattered that trust and left the entire community terrified. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. The FBI and local police work day and night trying to find a motive for the brutal crime.
January 27th, 2001, Etna, Vermont.
Hello?
At 6:30 p.m., Carol Johnson stops by the home of her friend Suzanne and Half Zantop. Carol's supposed to have dinner with the couple.
Suzanne?
It's not like them to forget a dinner engagement.
I'm here. Anybody home?
In the study, she makes a gruesome discovery. The room is in shambles. The friends are on the floor. Blood is everywhere. Seven minutes after receiving the dispatch, the Hanover police are on the scene. Eric Bates is a detective with the Hanover Police Department.
And I went into the door.
By the time I got there, some of the information had been relayed as to the nature of what had happened. That there were at least 2 bodies.
Carol tells police that the victims were both prominent professors at nearby Dartmouth College. Half Zantop was an earth sciences professor. His wife Suzanne was the chair of the German Studies program. Carol is their colleague. They'd invited her for dinner at 6:30 that evening.
All right, good to see you guys. See you tonight.
The Zantop house was extremely neat, orderly, clean. Nothing was out of place. There was a 2-level home, no basement. Check upstairs. The house hadn't been secured, and so that's when myself and one of the patrol sergeants went through the house and systematically cleared the house to make sure that the killers weren't still in the house for some reason. I can tell you I've never seen anything as horrific as the scene itself in the study of the Zantop home. Even with my military experience then and even now, nothing would compare to the scene that night. It was potentially a murder-suicide. And if not, and it was a double homicide, it appeared to me as though they were preparing a light meal. It was my impression that they were actually preparing a lunch and not a dinner.
Although the bodies were discovered at dinner time, Bates suspects the Zantops died early that afternoon before lunch, and that the couple has been dead for several hours.
There was so many valuables in that house that we wouldn't have even begun to know what was missing. We discovered some blood droppings and a bloody boot print, what appeared to be a boot print anyway, on the floor. It was right next to the Zantop's fireplace, and it's a wood fireplace.
Bates' first concern is to preserve the evidence.
The closest thing that was nearby was some kindling wood, some small kindling. So I basically cordoned off each blood dropping or footprint that I could find in hopes that later they could be analyzed.
The Hanover Police is a small-town department. They have limited resources. They'll need all the help they can get if they're going to solve this terrifying and puzzling crime. Because of the size of the Hanover PD, the Major Crimes Unit of the New Hampshire State Police comes in to investigate the murder.
We're one of the few departments that have a full-time homicide unit.
Sergeant Mark Mudgett is the lead investigator with the Major Crimes Unit of the New Hampshire State Police.
Sergeant Mudgett, we have probably a lot more experience than a lot of the local departments in being able to handle investigations of this magnitude.
All right, guys, here's the
investigators analyze the study, the primary crime scene.
As you look at the crime scene, if you're patient enough and you're willing to look, stop, and listen and take in all that information, positioning of the bodies, the physical evidence located inside that room, if you listen, that body will speak to you. It will tell you what happened. It will give you clues as to how it happened. It will tell you potentially who may have committed this particular crime.
Suzanne Zantop's body was lying near the door of the study. Her husband's body was further in the room. An upturned chair was at his feet, and 2 other chairs were set up near the desk. It looked like a conversation had taken place in the room. Near the 2 chairs, police make a startling discovery.
We got something under here.
As we started to process the inside of the study area, we immediately came across 2 black tactical-style knife sheaths. These knife sheaths were approximately 9 to 10 inches in length. Both of them were identical.
Police assume the missing knives were used to kill the Zantops. They could be the murder weapons, and 2 murder weapons could mean 2 killers. In the living room, they follow the blood trail leading from the study to the front door. Tom Pfeiffer is the director of the New Hampshire State Police Forensic Laboratory. He is relieved to see that the blood evidence has been carefully preserved.
This is a highly unusual and actually some of the best part of preserving the crime scene that could have occurred. This eliminated people entering the crime scene from actually stepping and obliterating or contaminating the footwear impression evidence.
Sergeant Mudgett notes that the front door is unlocked. There is no sign of forced entry into the house. Right now, all the investigators have are a few answers and a growing list of questions.
Did they invite the perpetrator or perpetrators into this? Or the questions that continue to go through your mind are, is this somebody that's known to the Zantops?
Near the fireplace, Pfeiffer finds the bloody boot print.
I wanted to enhance those impressions for better comparison purposes. I processed those with a blood enhancement reagent referred to as leuco crystal violet, or LCV. Upon application of the LCV, the impression was further enhanced to the point where it was going to be able to be used in identification purposes.
Once a suspect is in custody, the boot print could be important evidence for prosecutors. In 2001, Mike Delaney was the Assistant Attorney General for the Homicide Unit of the New Hampshire Attorney General's Office.
In New Hampshire, anytime a suspicious death is discovered, there's an immediate notification to prosecutors who are immediately dispatched to the scene to help the investigators with the case. In this case, our victims were loved and esteemed professors from an Ivy League college campus, and that made this case very unique. It was clear that the level of violence that had been inflicted on the Zantops was over and above anything that was necessary for the purpose of carrying out a crime, including a potential killing. In that regard, it had the hallmarks of a crime of passion, of somebody that acted out with a level of violence that was personal in nature.
In addition to the unlocked door, the extreme violence of the murders, it appears to be what investigators call overkill, is more evidence that the Xantops might have known their killers. If the killers knew their victims, then police are looking for someone who hated the Xantops enough to brutally stab them to death. Whoever committed this crime is a cold-blooded killer and must be stopped. But police must find them first. To do that, they need a motive, something to explain this heinous crime. In Etna, Vermont, 2 prominent professors are murdered, stabbed to death in their own home. Investigators suspect whoever killed the Xantops will try to leave town as soon as possible. They check the local airport, the bus station, and finally a local cab company.
How about that right there?
According to the dispatcher, one of the drivers picked up a local college student the night of January 27th. It was late, after midnight. The student was going to Manchester Airport. Investigators quickly established the student flew home due to a family emergency. With no other leads, they assume the killers either left town by car or are still somewhere in the area. By morning, the double homicide is headline news. The Xantops were prominent citizens. According to the medical examiner's office, wounds on the Xantop's body are consistent with a tactical combat knife. Mark Mudgett is assistant commander of the Major Crime Unit for the New Hampshire State Police.
Based on the injuries that we found on Half and Susanna at the time of autopsy, they had both sustained numerous stab wounds. Susanna had been stabbed 11 times and Half had been stabbed 10 times in various portions of their body. Their throats had been cut. A stabbing is a very personal crime. It's not something that you can accomplish at a distance of 12, 13, 14 feet like you can with a firearm. A stabbing is something that's a very personal crime. You have to get up close to the individual to be able to affect the damage that the offender wants to affect on these people.
Once again, the evidence suggests the Xantops knew their killers. The knife sheaths are now investigators' best clue to finding them. Tom Pfeiffer is the director of the New Hampshire State Police Forensic Lab.
There were fingerprints developed on the back of one of the knife sheaths left in the Xantop study. We then searched those fingerprints through the fingerprint identification system in our laboratory.
Investigators searched the NCIS database, comparing fingerprints found on the knife sheaths to a database containing the fingerprints of known offenders. They can't find a match.
The fact that we did not receive a match back from the fingerprint search leads us to several different conclusions. One, the person is not in the database, which means they haven't been arrested. Two, the fingerprints were such a quality that was not able to make a match with the computer. Or three, the person could have been arrested, however, the fingerprints, for some reason or another, did not make it into the database.
Police turned to their next best clue, a bloody boot print found at the scene.
We had to collect all the footwear evidence from everyone that entered the scene. There were about 14 pairs of footwear of personnel that had been into the crime scene. We collected all those pieces of footwear from the neighbors to the EMTs to the medical examiner to our own Attorney General's office.
Good impression of that. Great impression.
The forensics lab is able to eliminate all 14 pairs of footwear. Pfeiffer suspects the boot print belongs to one of the killers.
I scanned a photograph of this particular footwear impression at the crime scene, emailed that image down to the FBI laboratory in their footwear section, asked them to do a search of their database that contains thousands of outsole pattern designs.
The FBI lab tells Pfeiffer that the footwear impression was made by an upscale brand of hiking boots. It's a good clue, but until investigators have a suspect, it's meaningless.
There's an awful lot of information that has to be processed once you take part in processing the crime scene and the physical evidence. That's just one aspect of this investigation, or any investigation. Now you have to start seeking out persons for information.
In this case, that was quite a challenge. Everyone knew Hoff and Susanna Zantop. They had extensive faculty connections. They had hundreds of students that were in classes with them.
Investigators head to the college where the Zantops worked to learn all they can about their victims.
So realistically, our investigation just blew up in 360 degrees. You had to just start putting your feelers out. You had to start generating leads. You had to start interviewing a lot of people on campus, off campus, relatives, neighbors.
Altercations with anyone?
Well, maybe about a couple of days ago.
During the course of the interviews that we were doing on campus, we generated a person of interest who was a student of Hal Zantop's.
Can you tell me what that was about?
No, because they spoke Spanish.
According to a student, Half Zantop argued with one of his students just days before he was murdered.
We're pretty much going to wrap it up for today. Professor Hoff, yo necesito hablar para tú, para mi clave en mi clase de... Una tarea aquí. Yo necesito para mi graduación.
Police questioned the student.
It was reported to us that he had an extensive knife collection.
What kind of knives are they? They're collector's items.
When we conducted the actual interview with the individual, we also noted that he had sustained a recent abrasion to his head. So we were hoping that we were, onto something.
Why do you want to see my hand? Because I want to see your hand.
The student voluntarily submits to questioning.
Turn them over, let me see the other side.
He tells police he'd been friendly with Half Zantop ever since he took the professor's earth science class.
We have witnesses who told us
He explains he was just joking around with Professor Zantop.
we were laughing in Spanish.
Investigators look into the student's background, but he has a solid alibi on the day of the murders. He could not have killed the Zantops. Police also investigate the Zantops' relationships with their colleagues.
Popular professors on the campus.
On campus, they learn that Half Zantop had recently been given a position instead of another professor.
Recently, in the last.
We had to travel out to where the gentleman lived in the western part of the United States to interview him because he had come and gone from the Hanover area out about the time that the homicide had occurred or shortly thereafter.
The professor's car is impounded. There appear to be bloodstains in the trunk. Analysis reveals that the stains are not blood. According to the owner of the vehicle, they were made by stew that spilled in the trunk. While investigators follow every lead, two detectives work to try and find the murder weapons. They visit retail stores in the area that specialize in knives.
The scabbards that we had, the knife sheaths that we had, were produced for one type of blade, one type of knife. The blade itself is really a paramilitary or a tactical type of tool. Our armed forces use them. A lot of police agencies utilize them. This is not something that is a tool that's going to be used by the average hiker or the average individual.
6 days after the killings, the knife manufacturer supplies New Hampshire authorities with a list of all authorized retailers and distributors in the country, broken down by state. In addition, there are hundreds of dealers nationwide that sell the knives on the internet.
Based on the research we did with the manufacturer, we were able to determine that we were going to have to track down approximately 5,000 blades and knives, scabbards, that were produced and distributed worldwide. We didn't have a considerable amount of manpower to be able to do that.
The investigators need help and call in the FBI. At the time, Brian Fitzell was a special agent assigned to the Bedford, New Hampshire resident agency of the FBI.
They knew that it would encompass different states and even international because of the nationality of the Xantops. So they knew that they'd be reaching well outside of the New Hampshire borders and wanted us to be able to help with those kind of leads.
Along with state and local police, the FBI joins the Hanover Task Force.
This was front page news, and consistently the state police, the attorney general, was asking anyone with information, please call. And the volume of leads that were coming in were tremendous. You know, phone calls, people calling in with information.
The FBI deploys Rapid Start, a computer system. It is a database designed to track hundreds or even thousands of leads.
In any type of investigation, you need to keep your peripheral vision open. You don't want to miss anything. If you're too quick to focus in on one area, you start to disregard other telltale signs or other signs that you may or may not be on the right track.
As investigators struggle to make sense of their case, all over the country, media coverage of the case explodes. For law enforcement, the pressure is on to find a pair of brutal killers. In New Hampshire, 2 Ivy League professors have been brutally murdered in their own home. Investigators review the evidence again.
Yeah, absolutely. But again, it's sloppy.
They are trying to determine if the Xantops were targeted. It doesn't appear that they were. A knife is too clumsy a murder weapon for an assassination. Also, the killers made amateurish mistakes. If the murder had been planned, why would they leave behind the knife sheaths, a footprint, and even a fingerprint? Ironically, despite the evidence found at the scene, they're beginning to question whether the Xantops had any connection to their killers at all. Supervisory Special Agent Brian Fitzell.
It was looking, as this progressed more and more, that it was not an acquaintance that committed these acts.
Investigators can also rule out robbery. According to the initial investigation, nothing was taken from the house.
It was a murder scene that didn't match a lot of the known or the experience that most of these investigators have worked many homicides. It didn't fit into their normal model. It wasn't apparent that there was any motive other than the killing itself. It was as if these people were killed and the culprits ran right out the door.
Agents contact the FBI's Critical Incident Response Group in Quantico, Virginia. Investigators want to understand how these killers' minds work. They turn to the profilers.
They'll actually see hundreds of homicide cases during a year, and so they actually develop an expertise and they can see patterns because they see so many cases.
Supervisory Special Agent Jim Fitzgerald is a criminal investigative analyst, a profiler. He finds the case unusual.
We have 2 low-risk victims who are killed in their own house in broad daylight on a Saturday, nonetheless, when other people ostensibly in the neighborhood are home.
This is the crime scene. It appears that
Fitzgerald notes that the position of the chairs makes it appear as if an impromptu conference was going on prior to the murders.
The only thing that's in the doorway.
It was agreed upon with the investigators in the room and myself that it looks like there may have been at least several minutes in which there was some sort of conversation between Hoff and one or both of the offenders. It seems that the offender or offenders, and we were leaning towards 2 offenders at this point, were mission-oriented in that when they came into the house, their purpose was to kill Mr. and Mrs. Xantop.
The murder weapon, a pair of combat knives, is particularly troubling.
The use of a weapon in a homicide is very significant to your type of offender. If it's a cheap Saturday night special as opposed to a very expensive pistol with a silencer, that tells you have 2 different sort of offenders there. And on the other end of the continuum, on even a lower end of the continuum, if someone's using a knife, that tells you a lot about your offender too.
been able to determine what type of knife it actually was. It's like a...
The fact that the killers used knives and left behind crucial evidence tells him they are either sloppy or unsophisticated. Investigators suspect that the Zantops either knew their killers or allowed them into the house for some unknown reason. Fitzgerald is starting to get a picture of the killers, but the extreme level of violence troubles him.
When we're seeing a case that it makes no sense for various reasons, from a profiling perspective, we automatically hit the default to youthfulness. We just may have someone here youthful, that the motivation is not about money, the motivation is not to get back to somebody or even up a grudge. It's, hey, we're youthful and our filtering system in our brain hasn't kicked in yet, so I know, let's go out and just hurt or kill someone.
He fears he may be looking at some kids who killed just for the thrill of it.
That went bad.
On February 9th, a list of the killer's post-offensive behavior compiled by the FBI profilers is released to the public. Investigators ask the public to recall if they noticed anyone exhibiting odd behavior around the time of the murders, or changing their appearance, missing work, or having unexplained injuries or bruises on the hands or arms. Calls pour into the task force. None of the leads pan out. After 2 weeks of non-stop work, investigators have hit a dead end. Nothing about the Zantop murder makes sense. Seems like a crime without a motive. With each passing day, the community becomes more desperate. 2 murderers are at large, and law enforcement still has no idea why they chose the Zantops and who their next victim might be. In New Hampshire, a task force of state and local police and FBI agents tried to determine why someone murdered 2 Dartmouth professors in their own home.
There was no discernible motive that we could come up with as to why these people would be killed.
Supervisory Special Agent Jim Fitzgerald is an FBI profiler assigned to the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit.
We were told initially that there was nothing missing from the house. We found out about a week or so later that, in fact, something was missing from the house.
Agents learn Half Zantop always carried a wallet, and his wallet has never been recovered.
Prior to us learning that the wallet was missing, it almost appeared like a motiveless crime.
Now that they know one of the victims' wallets is missing, it changes everything.
We said this could be a little bit different now, and this may have been a quote-unquote simple robbery gone very, very bad.
Gentlemen, I just have some new information.
If the motive was indeed robbery, investigators have only a handful of clues found at the scene. 2 unidentified fingerprints, an unidentified boot print, and 2 empty knife sheaths. The task force focuses on the knife sheaths and finding the murder weapons.
There's really a point in an investigation where you provide the behavioral work as much as you can, and then you have to sit back and let the gumshoe work take place.
Check this out.
Working with the manufacturer, investigators work to track down the sale of 5,000 combat knives all over the country.
Okay. This is all the dealers of that variety? It's about 5,000 of them.
In addition to questioning retail dealers in the area, investigators research dealers who sell combat knives over the internet. On February 14th, they contact an internet retailer in Massachusetts. Supervisory Special Agent Brian Fitzel.
2 of the knives had been purchased by an individual in Vermont within, 20 miles of the crime scene.
Bells started going off and flags were raised that we may have a good break here.
The purchase of 2 identical combat knives is an extraordinary lead. Investigators follow up immediately. The 2 knives were purchased by a man named James Parker. He lives across the state line in Chelsea, Vermont. Mark Mudgett is assistant commander of the Major Crime Unit for the New Hampshire State Police.
When we made the initial contact with the occupants of the home, we were somewhat shocked at the fact that it was purchased by a juvenile.
Jimmy!
James Parker is only 16 years old.
What's going on? You James Parker? Yes. We want to talk to you about some knives.
James Parker had indicated that he had bought 2 knives at that time, that he'd bought one for himself and one for a friend of his, a gentleman by the name of Robert Tulloch, that they had purchased the knives so they could use them while they were rock climbing.
Oh, well, when we got to the
Detectives
site,
asked
they ended up
Parker where the
being too
knives
big
are
to go.
now.
So we took them to a local Army and Navy
He tells
store.
them the knives were big. The boys decided they were too heavy for rock climbing and sold them at an Army-Navy store.
The trooper said that the hair on the back of his neck was standing up because when he started this interview, he had the feeling that this was not a legitimate story.
Investigators asked Parker if he'd be willing to answer a few questions at the police station.
Is it okay if I tag along? It'd be fine.
Parker agrees to be interviewed.
There you go, son.
And then the investigators went to interview his partner. And again, same story, that didn't really measure up.
What happened to the knives?
Me and my
17-year-old Robert Tulloch corroborates Parker's story.
We realized that the knives were too heavy for us, so
The knives were too heavy. The boys sold them for $60 apiece to a stranger at the Army-Navy store in Burlington, Vermont.
60 for both.
Do you have any kind of footwear, shoes, boots, anything like that?
Investigators are immediately suspicious. Tulloch's statement is not just close to Parker's, it's virtually identical.
I'd like to have them come downtown and make a formal
It's as if the two boys memorized their statements beforehand.
as a suspect, but we need you to sign this form giving us permission to do that. Is that okay?
Then the detective notices something chilling.
He noticed that the footwear was the make and model of the hiking boot that we were looking at. So, I mean, he knew very early on this was probably somebody involved in this crime scene.
They want to take you down to headquarters.
He did a very good job of maintaining the interview because this was, no arrest warrants were in hand. He went out there to find out about the knives and then very quickly realized that he was dealing with one of the murderers right there.
Robert Tulloch agrees to accompany detectives to the Chelsea Sheriff's Office to be fingerprinted. Despite investigators' suspicions, without solid evidence to support an arrest warrant, they are unable to detain Tulloch or Parker. Deputy State Attorney General Mike Delaney.
They had no prior history with criminal activity. They cooperated with the police when they arrived. They voluntarily provided information and fingerprints and shoes.
he's free to go.
They place a late-night call to Tom Pfeiffer, the director of the New Hampshire State Police Forensic Laboratory.
I received a telephone call at 12 o'clock midnight requesting my assistance to the laboratory to do a comparison between a pair of boots that were recovered from a suspect in this case to those impressions that were developed at the crime scene.
In order to obtain an arrest warrant, investigators need proof that Robert Tulloch's boots match the bloody boot print found at the crime scene.
The pressure that was surrounding this particular case was enormous. I've never worked in a case in our state that had this much amount of pressure. If anything, it caused us to actually step back and recheck and double and triple check our work before we let anything out of this laboratory. This is your career on the line. If you make one misidentification, you might as well leave the world of forensics behind because you could never do another case.
Dr. Pfeiffer compares an impression taken from Tulloch's boots to an impression taken at the Zantop house.
About 3 o'clock in the morning, a colleague and myself made a match between the impressions left at the crime scene and the boots that were taken from the suspect.
The fingerprints collected from the scene match Parker's.
We knew that we were dealing with our murderers, and the two murderers knew that as well because after the state troopers left, these kids left that night. They got together and fled. So they gave fingerprints and footwear and then went into fugitive mode.
After weeks of searching, agents and police finally identify their suspects, only to lose them. Two deadly teenage killers are now on the loose. Forensic evidence has implicated two teens, James Parker and Robert Tulloch, in a brutal double murder.
Detective Eric Bates with Hanover Police
Armed with
Department.
warrants, police travel to the boys' homes.
To check your house if you don't have a problem.
Both of them live with their parents in the small town of Chelsea, Vermont.
No, I really don't. I have no idea.
When we got into Chelsea that morning, and it was early in the morning, we had learned that they had both fled during the night, telling each other's parents that they were both going to be with the other family.
Detective Eric Bates questions Robert Tulloch's parents. They have no idea where their son is.
It was difficult to deal with the parents of these killers. Knowing the information that we had, you learned that the family members were good people and that, unfortunately, their children had become murderers.
In Tulloch's bedroom, investigators make a crucial discovery. Inside a cardboard box, they find two combat knives.
Got him. Oh, good.
In their statements, Parker and Tulloch claimed they sold the knives to a stranger. Investigators have found the murder weapons. Mike Delaney is a deputy attorney general working with the homicide unit.
Once we had the knives in the bedroom, it was pretty clear what we were dealing with, and at that point, I think everyone had solidified the opinions that they, in fact, were involved directly in committing these crimes.
This is where we are. The problem is that Hanover...
The case transformed once Parker and Tulloch had fled. They had shifted gears, basically, from an investigative trying to ferret out who had caused this now to an actual pursuit. The momentum increased, the intensity increased, but it gave us a great deal of satisfaction that we were able to identify who the perpetrators were in this crime.
A bolo, or be on the lookout, is issued for two teenage boys driving a silver 1987 Audi. They are wanted for questioning in connection with the Zantop murders.
You never know what's inside the mind of a person, what they're actually going to do when confronted, but certainly from a law enforcement perspective and for the general public's sake, you have to assume the worst in that regard, and we did. An axiom by which we live in the profiling business is that past behavior is the best predictor of future behavior. So by all means, these two were considered armed and dangerous, and all the relevant agencies and states that were contacted were told that, be very careful when confronting these two, because they've killed already.
Parker and Tulloch's pictures appear in newspapers and on television throughout the country.
The FBI issued the UFAP, the unlawful flight to avoid prosecution, to help us in our fugitive investigation. What that allows is the FBI can turn up a lot of resources on a UFAP.
In Massachusetts, a state trooper finds an abandoned car at a truck stop. It is a silver 1987 Audi. The trooper calls in the license plates. Within minutes, he knows that the car belongs to James Parker. Agents converge on the truck stop. An employee remembers seeing two clean-cut teenage boys asking truckers for a ride to California.
They were both looking for rides, I think.
According to the truck stop employee, one of the boys had dark hair. He wore it spiked. The other boy was blonde. They called themselves Sam and Tyler.
Yeah, that's cool.
We were able to effectively narrow the time of our trail to their original leaving of the vehicle in Sturbridge, Massachusetts rest area.
In Sturbridge, the two boys hitched a ride with a husband and wife trucking team. They dropped the boys off at another rest stop.
It's determine what type of truck they left in from there, based on those aggressive application of FBI resources, immediately sending people to these rest areas.
The FBI moves fast. They notify trucking companies and dispatchers that the 2 teenage boys are wanted. They are believed to be armed and dangerous. Authorities learn the 2 teenage boys might have been spotted at a truck stop in Columbia, New Jersey. According to witnesses, they hitched a ride with another trucker.
We were narrowing the chase because as our information was getting better, it was clear to us where we thought they were heading.
Agents notify police all over the region that the fugitives seem to be heading west. February 19th, 4 a.m. 3 weeks after the double homicide, the sheriff in Newcastle, Indiana, listens to the chatter on his CB radio. He hears a trucker ask if somebody can give a ride to 2 boys from New Jersey. They want to go to California. He does not reveal he is a police officer and quickly tells the trucker he'd be happy to give the boys a ride. He instructs the trucker to drop them off at a nearby truck stop. The officer speeds to intercept them. According to the bolo, the suspects are armed and dangerous. Along the way, he calls for backup. He may have found the killers. In Indiana, a sheriff attempts to trap 2 teenage fugitives at a truck stop. 16-year-old James Parker and 17-year-old Robert Tulloch are both wanted for the brutal slaying of 2 prominent professors. At the truck stop, the officer asks the 2 boys for their names.
What's your name?
Tyler J. Jones.
Tyler J. Jones, what's the J stand for?
Jeffrey.
Tyler Jason Jones?
Jeffrey.
Jeffrey. Okay, where are you from?
We're from Encino, California.
Can you spell that?
E-N-S.
How about you? What's your social security number? You don't remember it right now? Hold on a second. Copy that, I got the description. That's you? You heard that? We've got the suspects here. We identified themselves. Guys, hold the camera in the car.
He takes Parker and Tulloch into custody.
Cooperation and future testimony we're looking at.
James Parker was brought back to the state of New Hampshire along with Robert Tulloch. Adult certification hearing was commenced against James Parker, and he was ultimately deemed to stand trial as an adult for the murders of Hal and Susanna Zantop.
Just to steal some money.
Once he was certified as an adult,
Steal cards and credit card information.
James Parker's attorneys approached the state of New Hampshire in wanting him to offer testimony against Robert Tulloch.
James Parker ended up cooperating with law enforcement and was interviewed extensively by the New Hampshire State Police and the Attorney General's office.
James Parker pleads guilty to a reduced charge, accomplice to second-degree murder. In exchange, he agrees to testify against his best friend. He tells police the chilling tale of what happened on the day the Zantops were murdered.
Try something.
What materialized is the fact that these 2 guys were bored with their life in Vermont, that they envisioned going to Australia or some far-off place. They originally decided that they were going to rob somebody and take their ATM card or something to that effect, take $10,000 and fly to Australia.
Hey, I've got a question. Our car
They
broke down.
came up with the idea of knocking on somebody's door and saying that they had car trouble, can we come in to use your phone? And when
I don't think so.
they tried this in Vermont, the person felt very strongly that these two were up to no good and slammed the door in their face and said, "Get off my property." He was very close to being a victim of that. Well, when their pretext for broken car didn't meet with good results, they changed it to students conducting a survey for their school.
Hey, we're doing a school.
So they showed up at the Zantop's house totally at random, and unfortunately, the fact that Hoff and Susanna were college professors led them to be very open and trusting of students and invite them into their home.
Come on in.
And in the office environment where Hoff was murdered, it was clear that he was sitting at his desk conversing with these two students who were writing their pretend notes and interviewing him, and and then the signal was given to murder him in cold blood right in his office.
Just a couple of survey questions. What's your favorite?
Suzanne and Half Zantop were teachers.
Is your wife the only person in this house?
They believed in helping students.
Okay. Well, how long have you been married, and what do you do?
Tragically, their dedication led to their deaths.
You know what?
Deaths at the hands of two teenagers who agents suspect may have killed simply for the thrill of it.
Their goal was to commit a violent act, and the Zantops just happened to be in the wrong place, in the wrong time, in their own home. And how unfortunate is that?
When these perpetrators were interviewed after the fact, one of them made the admission that they had realized that they had left the Sheeds and had given thought about coming back to the house to retrieve them. And I believe that they said when they went past the house, with that in mind, the police presence was already there.
Investigators are searching for some way to explain why Tulloch and Parker murdered the Zantops so brutally. FBI profiler James Fitzgerald sees this type of random violence as part of a terrifying trend.
We live in a different society today. Even in our youthful culture, they're constantly exposed to violence. And I believe Parker and Tulloch fit right into that category. The motivation's not to get back to somebody or even up a grudge. So I know, let's go out and just hurt or kill someone. And we're seeing more and more of that, unfortunately.
When you left there that night, where did you guys go?
We spent considerable amount of time with him, several days, as he went through how he and Robert Tulloch had concocted and eventually perpetrated this crime. He showed no signs of emotion, no signs of remorse for what he had done.
I stabbed the Zantops.
They were from more or less a middle-class environment, low crime area. It did not have some of the pitfalls that maybe others may be forced to experience in lesser environments. But nonetheless, there was a dysfunctionality about them. And when their chemistry was mixed, a violent outcome was apparently inevitable.
Investigators will never know what it was about the two boys and their chemistry that triggered such rage. In April 2002, James Parker is convicted of second-degree murder. He is sentenced to 25 years in prison. Robert Tulloch is convicted of first-degree murder. He is sentenced to spend the rest of his life in prison without the possibility of parole.